Welcome to the Consciousness Anywhere and Everywhere podcast. I am Shannon O'Hara, and I invite you to a completely new world of possibilities. You are about to listen to a conversation in the relationship series in the Consciousness Anywhere podcast. Relationships are like snowflakes and fingerprints. They are completely unique. We hope that you find some magic, some ease, some peace, some possibility for you in your relationships somewhere in this relationship series. Enjoy. We love you. Hello, everybody. Welcome forward to this beautiful day in your life. Are you living on planet heaven or not? And what would it take for today's podcast to contribute to your life being more heaven than hell? And I'm joined by my beautiful husband.
Hi.
And you're tuning into another relationship-focused topic on the Consciousness Anywhere podcast. If you are watching this on YouTube, welcome to, how do you pronounce
Castello di Casal Borgone.
It is the castle that my father and I actually am the smallest shareholder, but many other people also are an owner of this beautiful place. If you like this scenery, I invite you to come and check out the castle if you're ever in northern Italy.
This is a very small sliver. There is so much more to see here.
It is a absolutely gorgeous space and place.
You never see all of it, and that's incredible. So Casal Borgone is the town where it's at, and it's the castle in Casal Borgone.
And we're down here doing actually some other access classes right now, and we're sneaking in this recording on the 5 elements of intimacy in relationship.
Which is what we promised a few podcasts ago when we did one together, because it is one of these key elements. Gary says in the Foundation Manual, if you want to have a good relationship, there's 3 elements. If you want to have a great relationship, you've got to add the 5 elements of intimacy.
So, what are the 5 elements of intimacy as coined by Gary Major Douglas? Gary Major Wigglefinger Douglas?
The founder of Access Consciousness, in case you are tuning into this fresh. Okay, honor, vulnerability, allowance, gratitude, and trust.
Now, why are we doing a podcast on the 5 elements of intimacy as a married couple?
Because if you don't have these, you're going to struggle having a relationship that actually works.
And this is where, if you don't have these, your relationships can become like planet nightmare rather than planet heaven.
Exactly. Either people start checking out and not being present in the relationship, and start separating away, going different pathways. Like, people start holding secrets and lies and like all this sort of stuff. I've had relationships in the past. I'm pretty sure we all have had relationships in the past where those were not present. And we're going to obviously delve more into what these are.
The 5 elements of intimacy were not present, as
Correct.
Coined by Gary. And that's what we want to be really clear that we're talking about are very specific ideas that I think it would be interesting for you to ask yourself the question as you listen to this is, what are your current cornerstones, or what is the current foundation or ethos of your relationship reality? Now, deep down, every single one of us knows what we're doing relationship for. We might not be really cognizant of it, or even really wanting to be honest with ourselves about it, or having access to the information yet, or a combination of all of them, or we've never even asked ourselves the question. And if you are willing to be more honest with yourself, and I say honesty with like a painful look on my face if you're watching this live, because being honest with oneself can be intense and it can be uncomfortable, which is, I think, why a lot of people don't love it or do it.
It's also very socially unacceptable to be honest about things.
Well, and you don't need to be honest with others. I'm just talking about being honest with
No, but even if you're honest with yourself, it creates a very different dynamic with other people where you are not submitting to their reality or trying to fit in or trying to like all of the things that we tend to do socially. You do stand out in a different sort of way when you are willing to have and choose your reality, which when you haven't been might be a little bit uncomfortable and like a climb up the mountain before it becomes easy and great.
Yeah, and so if you listen to this podcast and you like the sound of having more honor, allowance, vulnerability, trust, and gratitude in your relationships, first has to start with your relationship with yourself. And then you might want to look at, like, something I've really had to do over time is look at some stuff that I really didn't like acknowledging about myself in relationship, which was that, like, I'll take, I guess allowance is the one I would say I've struggled with the most. I would look at where I wasn't an allowance of myself. Now, how do you know if you're not an allowance of yourself or somebody else? Because you're in judgment and there's like no peace around something that somebody else is choosing or an action that you've taken that you're like really giving yourself a hard time around. That's not allowance, that's judgment. And I had to be really honest with myself at one point and look at that I actually thought somewhere in my world that it was more correct to have Max like choose what I thought was correct rather than for him to have the choice, whatever that looked like for him. And when I realized that, I thought, wow, I'm totally not an allowance of this man having his own life and making the choices that he wants to make, even if I don't agree, which can turn into a very slippery slope of, you know, that can go so many directions. But at its core, it was that I didn't, and if I wasn't an allowance of Max, I didn't trust him. I didn't trust that he could choose right for him. And then in that very core fundamental attitude on my part, I had to put out and exert so much more energy to make sure that he chose what I thought was correct, which just is totally not sustainable in a relationship. If you constantly need to put energy into monitoring what somebody else is doing, i.e. being a super duper control freak, that might be like where some people are at in relationship, but that might be like where that's like the sum total of what they're ever going to have. And I looked at that for myself and I was like, is this the way I really want to like be using my energy? And is this what I want my life to feel like? And I had to be really honest with myself that control and judgment were options, but maybe honor and allowance could be investments that would yield the kind of relationship that I would prefer. So that's just like a sort of like a...
And it takes two to tango. You know, it seems like Shannon and I, with our relationship, it's like a progression together, I found. Okay, let me rewind a little bit. I also have to be not an allowance of myself to have that together. So it's not like Shannon wasn't an allowance of me. It always comes together. Like I also wasn't an allowance of myself. And in a lot of ways, I wasn't an allowance of her and who she be's. I had projections and expectations about what I thought should be right or is okay or not. So we have all these different forms. It takes two to tango in a relationship, but it takes one person to make a change for it to take a different direction. It doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work out or be perfect or look a certain way, but it means it's going to change. And if you're the one who's driving the change and desiring something different, then what if you chose without the expectation of what it will look like and what it will turn out? And that's I'd say that's one of the prerequisites of the 5 elements of intimacy when you're choosing those, is you can't have expectations. Like you really have to be willing to choose it for what it is and discover what that's going to show up.
Right, and expectation is the elimination of allowance at its core anyways.
And intimacy, period, I'd say. You can't have intimacy if you're expecting.
Because you're always projecting, you're never present.
And you're always like creating this gap of they need to fulfill this or this situation needs to fulfill this particular thing, rather than, like Shannon was saying, what is possible here? If I wasn't controlling this, what could this be? Far greater than I can even imagine.
So one of the cool things that I love about consciousness and getting more conscious and having choice and possibility is the ability to actually change like where you're functioning from, to question that. And could you guys imagine if we lived in a world where all relationships, like the foundation, the cornerstone, and the bases of all relationships was honor, allowance, vulnerability, trust, and gratitude?
That includes your kids and your family and like all the people.
Could you imagine right now if your parents had total allowance for you, were totally vulnerable with you, totally trusted you, had total gratitude for you, they didn't project and expect or judge you.
Or themselves.
Or themselves. Yeah, okay. So I think that's like the most relevant thing, I think, where we need to start, which is that the 5 elements of intimacy, you can only have them with somebody else if you have them with you first. That is the prerequisite, which I love because it actually puts all the power in your hands.
Yeah.
So let's take a magical moment to survey our psychological landscape. In this moment, as you're listening to this, are you in allowance of you, or are you in judgment of you? Are you being vulnerable with yourself? Do you trust you? Are you grateful for you? What's the last one? Vulnerability, allowance, trust, gratitude.
Honor. And
are you honoring you? So what does honor mean? Honor is to treat with regard.
For me, it was an exploration. I had to find out what honoring was for me because in this reality, say movies, and there's one version of honoring, or there's a few versions of honoring. You know, if you're watching a masculine action movie, then honoring is self-sacrifice. The man must self-sacrifice to save everybody else and to be the hero and to do all of that, right?
Be honorable, Harry Carey.
Exactly.
Oh dear.
So there's a great example on Netflix. There's one, Extraction with Chris Hemsworth, the Australian actor.
I knew that was.
For me, it's such a manly movie, and he's such a self-sacrificing, like for somebody else or for the greater good or for whatever it is.
Wow.
So there's that version of honoring, right, for men. What would honoring be from the female stereotype?
Ooh, yeah, but I don't know because actually I haven't really thought about it like you have around men. Kind of caught me off guard a little bit there.
Well, I think it might be a bit more of a man quality in this reality.
No, actually, I would say it's the same thing. It's sacrifice. Sacrifice for the family, sacrifice for the children, giving up yourself. Like, that's like the archetype of motherhood.
Right.
It's to honor the children, to honor the family, to honor your place as a mother. It's this incredibly sacrificial, So what do we mean by honoring self if we don't mean sacrificing yourself? We actually mean asking yourself, what choice could I make today that would include me? And it doesn't mean you exclude your children or you exclude taking care of others. It means that you include you too. And that's, I think, the real big magic key there is, do you include you in your choices? Or are you, where are you on the list of priorities?
Somewhere down the bottom, like last or second last.
Yeah. And are you even allowed to be at the top of your list of priorities?
Yeah, exactly. And how much judgment is there around that? If you are at the top of your priority list, that's called selfish. That's called
self-centered,
like all sorts of things. And we're even told that growing up, a lot of us, that you can't do that because that's self-centered. And most often, your parents didn't even realize because they were on the bottom of their list. So how could they actually really teach you, what a great version of having you on the top of your list and everybody else, or, what's relevant to you and how to have that.
And we've all heard, I think most of us, or have you guys heard that saying, you can't pour from a cup that's empty? We all know this logically, you can't actually be there for others if you're not there. But that's so oftentimes what occurs in most of our relationships is that we aren't there. We've given ourselves up in some way down the track, or it's such a tangled web we weave. But anyways, we aren't at the top of the list. And then it leads to this whole weird thing where the other person either has to provide the energy that we won't be for ourselves or take care of us, or it's do you want to be in a relationship with somebody who's not there? I guess that's the really big question. And I do think there is a place for being in a relationship. I know there are people who would choose to be in a relationship with somebody who's not there. And do you want to be in your life? I guess is the bigger question.
So I want to add this other element, which I actually learned from Shannon, which I believe she learned from Gary, well before that as well. is if you don't know what something is, for example, if you're hearing these 5 elements of intimacy and you're like, it sounds like a great idea, but I have no clue what that is for me, right? It sounds like, okay, like honoring, for example, you get like, I might self-sacrifice, or it looks these certain ways, like you've seen it, but what is it actually for you? So really to ask yourself the question, if you're not sure what honoring is for you, ask yourself, or ask the universe, universe, what is this? Can you please show me? And in due time, you will get these elements of what that is for you, and you will have a connection with what that element is rather than just having the idea. Because when I first started with these 5, I just had the idea and it was a great idea, but I had no connection for me what those things are. And now I have, through asking, have way more of a connection what that actually is and can actually include that.
That being said, I would imagine and wager to bet that you totally know what was honoring and not honoring.
But I wasn't willing to acknowledge it or be honest with myself.
Different. Right, but that's different.
I had all of these hardwiring ways into something else where I couldn't really.
And if you acknowledged that you weren't, that the choice you were making wasn't honoring of you, or you were taking an action that wasn't honoring of somebody that you said you cared about, if you were honest about that, then what would happen?
Yeah, it's like my structure would have fallen down. Like everything I'd pieced together and built together, that was this other idea.
So the structure is I would say the foundation that the 5 elements of intimacy needs to replace. It's these other structures of relationship that we have, that we maintain at all costs, that are quite diminishing of us and others. And the reason why I'm doing this series of relationship focused podcasts is due to how much we can harm ourselves in relationships. So as a facilitator, as a life coach, it's the first time I've ever called myself a life coach.
I know.
As a facilitator of access consciousness, call it whatever you want, as somebody who actually desires a lighter, brighter, easier universe, while knowing that the power, that change, that choice starts in my own consciousness, I have worked with thousands of people over the years who have so many of their limitations and restrictions in crazy places are rooted in these weird allegiances to relationships that don't work. And if you had more choice around relationships, and if you got more clear and sort of honest and clean about the dynamics of the relationships that you've been in, how much more freedom would you have? And are you allowed to have that freedom? And if you aren't giving yourself that freedom, who exactly is the one who gives you permission to be free in life? And that's more honoring. Are you honoring that this is your life, that you have a choice?
Full stop. Well, question mark.
I'm let me say it to you with a smile so it doesn't hurt so much.
So let's talk about vulnerability.
Oh, yes. Beautiful.
This is another really big one.
Perfect segue.
Vulnerability. What is that for you? What's the first thing that comes up? Is it a weakness? Is it where you can be destroyed? Is it...
Well, but do you have the vulnerability to be honest with yourself even if it hurts? Like last night, Max and I had an argument, and in the nighttime that we were both, I would actually say that was the first time we were both being equal assholes. So it was good that it wasn't just me, it wasn't just him. I could see where we were both completely fueling the fire. And in the end, I was like, just leave, and he went to the other, went to the other room. And I don't know, I'm laying there, and as he's leaving, I'm like, oh, that was so completely not the outcome I was hoping for in this situation. That hurt. That hurt me. I knew he was not loving it. So 20 minutes later, I was just laying there, and I'm like, okay, I really love this man. If I'm being really vulnerable with myself, what do I need to be? What do I need to be right now to take care of me in this situation that I created that is actually hurting me? And I said, babe, I'm sorry. And he goes, I'm sorry too. But in the past, I wouldn't have had that vulnerability with myself. I would have stayed angry and stayed right and righteous for, I don't know how long, until eventually I would have, surrendered to that I really liked him and let's never talk about me being an asshole again, but let's just pretend like you're still wrong. And it's like all this like weird learned behaviors that have nothing to do with being vulnerable with self.
Yeah. Wrongness might be another thing that gets in the way, or that is used instead of vulnerability. So rather than having the vulnerability, which as Shannon mentioned, has like this, let's call it pain or a hurt to it.
I would say vulnerability is very uncomfortable in my experience, but you guys trust your own experience. I mean, Gary gives often the analogy of vulnerability being like the open wound.
Yeah.
And an open wound is like, that's some sensitive shit.
So if you didn't classify it as pain necessarily, you were interesting point of view about what it felt like, what it seemed like, or everything that's around that. And you didn't have to take it down the path of wrongness, which is usually like closing the lid on something when you like decide, I'm wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong, because there's no question there. If you allowed it to be what it is, interesting point of view, this is whatever it is, and then ask a question of, okay, what is truly possible here? And this is what Shannon was alluding to in the example last night, is she was in question, like, what else is possible here? Essentially, I do love this person. This is not the way I would like this to go. Like, what else is truly possible? And that's, I mean, you can only choose that process, essentially. It's, you can't preempt that process, like what that's going to be and what it's going to look like and feel like and blah, blah, blah. You have to be willing to go there for actual vulnerability to, be available.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely a matter of like being vulnerable with information that was not particularly comfortable for me to be present with. So vulnerability is, I mean, when is vulnerability ever seen as a strength or a key or a fundamental beneficial tool for much of anything? And we are positing that in relationships that vulnerability is actually a fundamental key and tool for creation. In fact, if it's missing, the relationship could potentially not flourish.
And that's a key for a relationship, but it's also like a total key. It has no less value if you're single or not in a relationship too. Vulnerability, I find, is such a superpower.
Wow.
The hardest things of vulnerability that I've had to confront is where I, like Shannon said, where I've chosen, like I've been an asshole, or there's something that I've chosen that is destructive, or and I've done it for a long time. Like those things, to be honest about that and to be vulnerable with that is the toughest. And that's applicable to anybody. If you desire more consciousness, if you desire to grow, have something different, change, this is like such a key. The willingness to be honest with yourself, judging yourself is not being honest with yourself, by the way.
Not being vulnerable with yourself either.
Exactly. Having the vulnerability is no judgment, and allowing things to be how they are and allowing them to change.
What is Access Me?
What is Access Me?
What is Access Me? The name already says it all.
Best gift on planet Earth at the moment.
It's like really a wealth of everything.
So comprehensive.
For anybody interested in consciousness.
It's Access Me.
It's an app that has 69,000 hours of content.
There's so many freaking classes.
It's from Access Consciousness.
All 25 years of classes.
Gary, Douglas, Dr. Dane here.
There is a whole range of topics.
It's the invitation that I've been waiting for.
It's like the University of Consciousness.
Any topic you need to look at, change, revise, and get inspired about in your life, everything's on there. So it's just amazing. I have it like this every time I want.
You have access to all of it.
I don't think I've ever had an app where I can go listen to something and actually get something back from it and feel better about myself.
There's always something else and I never get bored. So much to explore. I just love it.
You can't find streaming app like that in the whole universe.
What shall we do next?
Allowance? No. Did we do Allowance?
Not
Well,
yet.
not really.
No.
Allowance is the one I'm the worst at. Much better than I used to be. Haha.
However, we've seen the greatest leaps and bounds in this area.
Yes, we have. Allowance is that you basically allow others, you allow choice. Like you be an allowance of you, allowance of the other person to be and do and choose whatever it is that they be and do and choose.
An allowance of change.
An allowance of change, allowance of choice, allowance for things to go your way, allowance in things showing up in ways that you cannot predict or determine or control or foresee. That's a big key for letting the universe gift to you, is being an allowance of the way things can show up, not the way you think things should show up.
Not to be confused with acceptance and sort of being the rug on the floor that...
The doormat, right?
The doormat that everybody gets to wipe their feet on and you have to submit to. That's not allowance, because you're not being an allowance of you and you like existing and being in your life and in the equation as well. So allowance, once again, like honoring, has to include you. You have to be part of everything for you to be able to have allowance.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more about allowance? Because honestly, I think you're much better at it than me.
Cool. So yes, not acceptance. Allowance, like one of the greatest tools that I've learned from Access is interesting point of view when it comes to allowance. An interesting point of view is not about being neutral, and it's not about not existing in a situation. It's not about retreating, not withdrawing. Interesting point of view is being totally present, but not having to have a fixed point of view, or not having to buy a fixed point of view, or not having to reject or resist a fixed point of view. So it's a very active choice. Interesting point of view, I have this point of view, or interesting point of view, they have this point of view, is a very active choice for more space, possibility, change, and presence with what is. So it's one of those other things that neutralizes judgment. It removes judgment from the situation so you can actually create.
Yeah, allowance creates more space. That's one of the things you said. It actually creates space.
Yeah. You don't have to know where something's going to go or how to change something. The allowance and interesting point of view allows the space for something to show up.
I realized that where I was weird with my lack of allowance was that I would watch myself not be an allowance of Max or not be an allowance of myself, but I'll use Max as the first example and then myself as a second example. And I asked myself, I was like, why am I being so controlling about what I think he should choose? And I realized that I fundamentally didn't trust that Max could choose or would choose best for him. And that then showed me how the 5 elements of intimacy are all interconnected. How when you're lacking allowance or vulnerability or gratitude, like it's usually an indicator of it's tied into one of the other elements too. And I really wasn't trusting Max. And I thought, that's weird. Like, why would it's like, it just seemed like this very weird, well, now, was I also aware of where Max wasn't choosing greater for him? Absolutely.
This is the piece that I wanted to add. Like, how much were you aware a lot of the time where I didn't trust myself?
Yeah, totally.
Because that's something that I was really, like, I believed in that point of view that I couldn't be trusted, and I wasn't choosing to trust myself.
So he like would be like
projecting
that onto the situation and projecting that out. So in essence, it's like, we teach people how to treat us. Yeah. So yes, that was absolutely part of it, but it wasn't all of it.
So, but there is these 2 elements of change, right? Like whenever, I noticed that whenever I would trust myself more and be like, no, I know this, then Shannon would need to adjust in the relationship for that new reality. And then what was a real gift too was when she would trust me more than I would trust myself. And it opened this space for me to explore that trust for myself rather than like 2 points of view coming together of no trust. And that's kind of cements that into place.
Oof, big time.
Yeah.
And the place of allowance for me, I'd actually say that being an allowance of me in the relationship was actually the bigger key for me. Because I noticed that I had all this conflict and upset around the relationship. And at one point, it was my dad who actually said, like, well, are you an allowance? And I was like, I'm trying to be an allowance of Max. And he goes, no, an allowance of you. And I was like, no, I am not. I have and what I realized was that I was withholding what actually was true for me from the equation. And I realized I had to be an allowance of me too, and I had to be an allowance of what worked for me. And that was like this life force energy came into my universe, and it made it so much easier to be in the relationship because I wasn't like disavowing all the elements that were relevant for me. So it became this interesting awareness, or sort of like learning how to include me, be an allowance of me in the relationship, include all of Max, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And I think that that's probably should be the slogan for relationships: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. Because we all know that relationships can be good, they can be bad, they can be ugly, and they can be beautiful. And a wise man would ask, why do we do relationships?
And that's the other thing that I wanted to mention is like, that is like the very first question. Do you actually desire a relationship? Because there is no need for a relationship. Like if you come from a choice, then you actually allow for so much more possibility. But if it's a need and a requirement, etc., then it's tricky. Next element. How about gratitude?
Gratitude! The gratitude! If you guys have not seen
Big Mouth.
Big Mouth, we highly recommend on Netflix.
It's a show on Netflix. It's a cartoon show, but it's about like pubescence and all that sort of stuff. And they introduce these different elements. And one of them is gratitude. And then they have this character called Gratitoad. He's a toad who shows people to be grateful. So what's gratitude for you?
Well, I'm not really sure if it's about what's gratitude for me. I'm pretty sure gratitude just is a thing that exists, that we could all pretty much get what is gratitude and what's not gratitude.
That's interesting, actually. Yeah, it's like, it's different to like vulnerability and honor, is my sense. It's like clear somehow what it is. Like it's pretty straightforward.
Oh, interesting. I would say vulnerability and honor are things that exist that are not, subjective? Like it's not based on the subject.
From your perspective.
Yeah, they're actually things that can be identified and experienced objectively. But trust is totally subjective. Wait, objective? Subjective. I get those two words mixed up a lot. I'm dyslexic, and subjective and objective, P's and B's.
Gratitude for me seems more like a direct choice or something. For me, it was easier to access than it was vulnerability and honor. For me, I had to like explore and discover vulnerability and honoring more so.
Gratitude.
Because I could have the idea of vulnerability, for example, but I wasn't really choosing vulnerability. Wow. But gratitude is like, it's pretty clear cut if you're being grateful or not. It might be different. It might be different for other people too. So that's just my experience.
Well, I know what gratitude isn't. Gratitude isn't judgment. Like if you're in judgment of yourself or somebody else, that's not gratitude.
Yeah. But gratitude is the antidote to judgment. If you find yourself stuck in judgment, like it's too easy to go to right and wrong, good and bad, then if you, like for example, in regards to a person, and let's talk about relationship. So rather than having that be fixed there, what are you grateful for? Like look at the things that you're grateful for. And that is a very tangible antidote to judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have been reminded multiple times in my relationship reality to focus on what I'm grateful for about you. And if I'm honest, like it
really
worked.
Works.
It totally has worked. Like
I notice it.
Because I can tend towards criticism, and that's not like this is not like an omission of guilt or a submission of guilt. It's more just like it's good to know who you are. Yeah. And some people can be super withdrawn. Some people can be really, I don't know.
Forceful?
Forceful. Some people can be critical. I do tend to be really critical, and it's something that I really had to work on. And I noticed that I could wake up and find 15 things to be critical about, and I thought, well, what if I could wake up and find 15 things to be grateful about? So I've actually been really turning that ship around over the years, and it makes a massive difference.
I've totally noticed that, yeah. Where you've chosen like the allowance, the gratitude, those different things, it's incredible. So gratitude, is there anything else on that?
I mean, I think there's so much out there about gratitude this day and age. I mean, I think they've even literally done scientific studies about gratitude.
It's pretty well popularized.
Yeah, but it's also well established as a, like, something that can enhance and benefit our lives.
Oh, one thing I want to say, gratitude isn't like positive judgment.
Oh, good point.
It's not like keeping judgment and then putting like a smear of shine on top to make it seem better. Like, gratitude is actually this engagement in what you're actually truly grateful for, not pretending.
And I guess you could also pretend until you actually are grateful. I mean,
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, but not positive judgment, meaning like gratitude isn't, they're so beautiful, they're so right, they're so wonderful, they're so perfect. Like, that's not gratitude, that's positive judgment. Gratitude is, well, even if they're not perfect, even if he smells bad, like, I'm so grateful for their energy in my life.
And what would it take for them to smell better?
What would it take for them to smell better? And not having, and being an allowance of the way they smell, and still caring about you and them enough to be like, hey, so you smell funny.
Cool. So gratitude, allowance, honor, vulnerability, trust.
Trust. I actually like to upgrade trust to knowing.
I like this conversation you've been having, actually. It's really great.
Trust is the original, I think it's like the entry level concept around this.
It can be easily misidentified and like misused.
Yeah, trust can be weaponized very easily as like you can totally have blind faith. I totally trusted them. Right.
And use it as an excuse or blame or...
Yeah, but like, what did you know? So if you look at what you know, knowing is can't be weaponized. It's much clearer in my universe than trust.
Yeah.
Like, what do I know about Max? Not what would it take for me to trust that Max is not going to diminish himself. Like, that one's like way weirder. Like, what do I know? Well, I know Max can sometimes diminish himself, and I also know that he's perfectly capable of making choices for greater for himself too. So I know that. What do I know about me? I know that I'm all these things. It's like knowing who you're with, knowing the person that you are in relationship, knowing who you're in relationship with is different than trying to avoid negative awarenesses about the people you're in relationship with, because none of us are perfect. And you have to recognize that you're probably in a relationship with somebody who's not perfect, or you are absolutely in a relationship with somebody who's not perfect. And that person is also, if they're in a relationship with you, they are also in a relationship with somebody who is not perfect. And so knowing the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful of the people you're in relationship with and of yourself, in my opinion, makes life just so much cleaner and clearer. But you can only do that with allowance fully intact, and because otherwise we could veer off into the universe of judgment too easily, which is the cancer that kills the great fulfillments we can have from our relationships.
Side note, knowing is not a form of conclusion for all those conclusionists out there like myself.
Oh, good one. Yeah.
In this reality, like when you know something, like you've essentially concluded it.
You were going to do that.
Exactly. I concluded you were going to do that already. So I
Right.
knew.
Oh.
So this is like another version of how that's a tool and an awareness that can be weaponized. But knowing is really different. Knowing is always a question. There's never a full stop. Just like with energy in the world, it never stops. There is no energy, if you look at molecules, if you look at sunshine, like light energy or all the forms of energy, they never stop. There is no such thing. Nothing in nature ever stops. If an animal stops, it dies, essentially, and nothing stops growing in nature. Everything is constantly in creation. So that is the nature of the universe and of energy. So our awareness is this constant fluent thing. As soon as we have an awareness and we try and hold on to it, we're coming to conclusion. Awareness and knowing is a continuous question. Yes, there might be a fuller knowing that is sort of like is more, it stays for a period of time, but you've got to be in the question for it to change always as well. Yeah,
knowing the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful of the other and of yourself isn't coming to conclusion about what's good, bad, ugly, and beautiful about them. It's knowing, right now I know these are my limitations, these are my greatnesses, this is where I can be ugly, and this is where I can be beautiful. And then tomorrow, what else is possible? Like, it will change. So knowing isn't, thank you, it's not a conclusion. It's like, it is knowing what is, not concluding what is, and then nothing else ever is true.
And I would also say that knowing always has to have question with it, like this energy of question where it's the curiosity for what else is possible. Like the question of what else is possible is always there. If it's not, it's a conclusion. So
that's the 5 elements of intimacy.
That's the 5. I fucking love talking about these actually, because it like really reminds me too of how much it has contributed to my life and living, and just awareness, and just like having, because I always wanted greater connection, and how I was never taught how to. And when I started with Access, everything for me was still a very good idea for quite a number of years. And then piece by piece, I started choosing things more so, like these 5 elements. And like I have so much more of a sense of connection to myself and to my world, and therefore with other people. Like Shannon, she has facilitated this for me hugely, like actually having more of these, and having more of these with my children. And, you know, I don't have to be wrong. I can be aware, and, and I can be close to everything.
With our children, that is such a key, because we have teenagers.
18 and 15
Max
right now.
has 2 children from his previous marriage, Finn and Estelle, and they are amazing. And Finn just turned 18 in February, and he got his first tattoo the other day, and I had no warning, and I was like, he's like, how do you like my new tattoo? And I was like in shock. I didn't actually think Finn could shock me, but I was like, wow, I was completely unprepared for that. And Finn's just like, and Max, I was like, did you know Finn got a tattoo? And Max was like, oh, did he? Like, it was like no charge at all. And I was like, okay, right, so Finn got a tattoo. And then I was like, well, his life, his body, his choice, his price to pay, or his, you know, his word to yield. Yeah, it's like, it's like totally, it's like I have to trust that he can handle his life, and that he, like, he's perfectly, I have to trust, especially with an 18-year-old, that we've done our best up till this point, and that we've given him the foundation that will allow him to thrive in what he chooses to thrive in life. And to trust that he's gonna make his life the way he wants to make his life.
And if you are a parent that doesn't really trust themselves, because it doesn't matter where you are, consider this like the beginning of your journey of, it's not about teaching the right things to your kids or doing parenting perfect, essentially. What if you were willing to have that vulnerability with wherever you're at, and then look at these other 4 elements with the vulnerability to discover what is true for you, and just take step by step on that process? Because I know parenting is one of those areas where it's so easy to go into judgment of ourselves. And for me, I found especially like parenting young kids, because when my kids were younger, I had no fucking clue, essentially, about like even my world and what was true for me, and like all these things we're talking about, I didn't have access to them in the same way. So what if that's okay? And what if you you have choice, and you can continue to keep choosing, and so do they.
My favorite, like parenting story. Well, I don't think I have, actually it's not my favorite, but I have this one of Finn, where we were in South Africa at one point, and I had done all the laundry, and I had put everyone's laundry out on the kitchen table for them to take back to their bedrooms. And I asked the kids, I was like, can you guys please make sure to take your laundry before you go out? So I come back after lunch, and the only person's laundry who's still sitting on the kitchen table is Finn's. And I was immediately frustrated and angry. And I was like, why am I angry? And I realized that it was really, really important to me that he at least include my request about stuff. And I went to him, and I could have gone to him with anger. You didn't pick up your clothes. You always ignore me. But I since I asked myself a bunch of questions, because I was honoring me and looking for what was, easier on me, I realized that it mattered to me that he even just, his leaving his clothes on the kitchen table was some sort of like disregard, dishonoring of me, which it may or may not have been, like teenagers. But I realized that regardless of where he was coming from with it, it did matter to me that there was some sort of acknowledgement of what was being provided and what was asked of him.
So Shannon was including herself.
Yeah, I was including myself. So I went to him and I said, hey, I noticed your clothes are still on the kitchen table. And he goes, oh, I'm so sorry. And he goes and grabs them. And I said, hey, Finn, it really matters to me if you take action on what I ask for, it kind of like shows me that you care about me. And he looked at me, and I remember this, and he just sort of like looked at me, and I could tell he was like registering something. And from that day forward, and I think this was four years ago maybe, from that day forward, if I ask him to do something, he will either do it within like a reasonable time, or he'll communicate to me. He'll say, I heard you. Is it okay with you if I do it at this other point? Because I've got these other things to do. So he communicates with me about it. And that's really like this incredible testament to Finn. He has that kind of maturity, but he really listened to me. And I think I owe a lot of that interaction and that moment to the 5 elements of intimacy. Because if I had come to him with all guns blazing, and frustrated and being angry with him and in reaction, he would have had no choice but to defend himself. And what would the progress have been in that? Nothing. But I was able to come to him with vulnerability and let him know, like, hey, I know it might not be personal for you, and when you ignore me and disregard my request, it's sort of, I go to this place of like that you don't really care. And I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to communicate to me or not. But that, if it's possible, like it really does matter to me that you take your clothes, And he listened to me. And I was like, cool.
I think that's great because you were including yourself and then you were giving him the information with like congruent with like what you've looked at for yourself. I think that's really powerful and such a great example.
He has always put his clothes away immediately since then.
Because he is actually a very caring, very honoring guy. But with kids, we obviously like there's these things where we just need to connect certain things and then they have access to that. Oh.
Well, thanks, babe.
Thank you.
So if you guys, so if you're interested in the 5 elements of intimacy more on this topic, because obviously it's epic and huge, it's in the Access Consciousness Foundation class. There is also a 5 elements of intimacy product that I have that will be linked in the show notes of this. That was just like an evening. That's if you want more information about that. Simone Milicis also has done a 5 elements of intimacy class. I don't know the context or the quantity of that class.
And then on Access Me, I imagine there is some stuff there too. Access Me is a subscription service by Access Consciousness where you get access to 25 plus
years of classes.
Gary, Dane, Simone, Shannon's on there as well.
Yeah, such good sex and relationship content in the Access Me app, and that'll be linked as well. And if you want to work through your relationships more with Max and I, we're offering a Relationship 101 class starting
at the end of April. So 29th of April, I believe it begins. And it's 6 calls that we'll do so you can ask any questions around anything you have on this. Yeah,
and if you're listening in the future and April has long gone, that class and other sex and relationship content classes and podcasts will be available in the show notes as well, because we all know that it's like if consciousness can contribute to our relationships, what else is possible?
Totally. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to this show. My target is to make consciousness easy to find and choose. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes and share this with somebody who you know who might be looking for more consciousness in their life. You can visit me on shannon-o'hara.com or talktotheentities.com. And to learn more about the amazing tools of Access Consciousness, you can visit accessconsciousness.com and be sure to subscribe to the podcast.